Welcome, the Lord's chosen. People don't fear what they understand. They fear what reflects them too clearly. That single truth explains reactions that never made sense. The awkward pauses, the sudden defensiveness, the unexplained tension that enters a room the moment you arrive. It isn't your confidence. It isn't your intelligence. It isn't even your presence. It's the mirror effect you carry without trying. Here's a fact most people never confront. The human brain spends more energy protecting identity than pursuing truth. Studies in behavioral psychology show that when someone's self-image is threatened, the brain reacts the same way it does to physical danger, with denial, aggression, or withdrawal. In other words, discomfort doesn't come from harm. It comes from recognition. And recognition, when uninvited, is deeply unsettling. Now imagine being someone who unintentionally triggers that response. You don't lecture, you don't compete, you don't announce superiority, you simply exist in a way that exposes the distance between who people say they are and who they actually live as. That gap is loud, louder than words, louder than confidence, louder than charisma. People are comfortable with confidence they can predict. They're fine with ambition that asks for permission. They even tolerate strength that explains itself. What unsettles them is quiet alignment, when thoughts, choices, and boundaries quietly agree with each other. No performance, no apology, no need to convince anyone, just consistency. And consistency is terrifying to people who survive by contradiction. There's also an unspoken social agreement most people rely on. Don't make me look at myself too closely. You break that agreement by accident, not by being better, but by being clearer. And clarity, oddly enough, feels rude in a world built on emotional noise. To add a little humor to the tragedy of it all, people will swear you're intimidating while knowing absolutely nothing about you. No resume, no background check, no villain monologue, just vibes and unresolved personal issues doing the heavy lifting. If you ever wondered why some people react to you with unease instead of curiosity, this is why. If you could see yourself the way they do, you wouldn't feel flattered. You'd understand their fear, not because you threaten them, but because you remind them of what they've been avoiding. Number one, you expose the gap between who they pretend to be and who they actually are. Most people are not living as who they truly are. They are living as who they learned to survive as. Over time, that survival version becomes polished, defended, and protected at all costs. They call it personality, maturity, or realism. In truth, it is often a compromise they no longer want to admit they made. When you show up, that compromise becomes visible. You don't need to challenge them or correct them. Your way of thinking, speaking, and moving through life quietly highlights the difference between intention and action. You represent follow-through in a world full of explanation. That contrast is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. It turns stories into measurements. People can tolerate advice, they can tolerate criticism. What they struggle with is contrast. Contrast forces comparison, and comparison forces honesty. When someone sees you living closer to your values than they are living to theirs, something inside them tightens. Not because you are doing anything wrong, but because you are doing something they stopped believing was possible for themselves. This is where fear enters, not dramatic fear, but subtle fear. The kind that sounds like irritation, dismissal, sarcasm, or sudden coldness. It is the fear of exposure without being accused. You don't say, "You're pretending." Your consistency says it for you. Your choices underline what they keep postponing. Your boundaries quietly reveal where theirs collapsed. What makes this especially unsettling is that you don't need an audience. You are not performing authenticity. You are not advertising growth. You are simply aligned. That makes it impossible for them to reduce your presence to ego or showmanship. There is no easy narrative that protects their self-image. Deep down, they recognize the gap. They feel it when conversations end. They feel it when they replay interactions later. They feel it when your words linger longer than expected. And because closing that gap would require change, accountability, or risk, it feels safer to label you as intimidating, distant, or different. In reality, you are just honest in a world that survives on editing. And honesty, when it reflects back an unfinished life, feels less like insight and more like a threat. Number 2, you operate without needing their approval, and that breaks their leverage. Most people build their world around approval. They wake up, make choices, and measure success through the lens of who will notice, who will compliment, who will react. It's not always conscious, but it shapes almost every decision. Approval becomes a quiet currency they trade for comfort, safety, and acceptance. When someone steps into their space who doesn't need that currency, the entire system falters. That someone is you. You move through life without constantly checking for validation. You make decisions, take actions, and stand by your choices without needing a nod or a pat on the back. That kind of independence is rare, and it's disorienting to people who rely on social feedback to feel secure. When approval doesn't work as a tool to influence or control, it leaves them exposed. They realize that their usual levers of influence, praise, critique, manipulation, or even subtle pressure, are ineffective. Their sense of power crumbles quietly, and that crumble feels like fear. It's not about arrogance or dominance. You aren't forcing them to feel small. You're simply operating on a different level of self-sufficiency. That alone makes them anxious, because they can see the contrast so clearly. You are proof that stability and strength don't require anyone else's permission. You move through space freely, unconcerned with judgment or approval, and in doing so you reveal just how dependent they've become on external validation. What makes this unsettling is that your independence is effortless. You aren't flaunting it. You aren't showing off your detachment. You simply exist in a way that forces them to confront their reliance on others for emotional equilibrium. That confrontation isn't polite or easy to ignore. It sticks, quietly echoing in moments they weren't expecting to feel challenged. And because they built so much of their identity around what others think, seeing someone thrive without that dependency is deeply destabilizing. It's a reminder that the rules they've relied on no longer apply, and that realization is both uncomfortable and unavoidable. You don't even have to speak. Your freedom says it all. Number 3, you don't need the room to agree with you to remain steady. Most people live in a constant negotiation with the world around them. They bend, adjust, and perform to keep peace, to be liked, or simply to avoid conflict. Approval isn't just comforting for them, it's survival. Their sense of security depends on consensus, on the subtle nods, the murmured agreements, the quiet reinforcement of their choices. When someone enters a room who doesn't follow that rule, who doesn't need the room to validate their stance, their decisions, or even their presence, it throws everything off balance. You don't crave agreement. You don't measure your worth by the number of heads nodding your way. You stand firm even if everyone else disagrees. That alone is enough to make people uneasy, because it exposes their dependency. Their stability has always relied on feedback loops. If everyone seems okay, they feel okay. When someone doesn't play that game, it forces them to confront how fragile their own confidence really is. This creates a subtle tension that isn't loud or obvious, but it's palpable. People might laugh at your words, ignore your suggestions, or even try to argue against you, but none of it alters the fact that your steadiness isn't negotiable. That steadiness acts like a silent mirror, reflecting how much energy they spend seeking approval and trying to fit in. And mirrors make people uncomfortable, especially when they see the cracks in their own carefully constructed persona. What makes this effect even more powerful is how effortless it looks. You're not trying to dominate a conversation or prove a point. You simply exist in alignment with yourself, and that alignment speaks louder than words. It highlights the tension between independence and dependency, between confidence and insecurity, between truth and performance. Your calm certainty, your refusal to bend for consensus, isn't just a trait, it's a revelation. It forces people to reckon with the fact that life doesn't have to revolve around seeking permission or agreement. And that realization, even quietly observed, is deeply unsettling for those who've spent their lives relying on the room to approve them. Number 4, you remind them of the life they postponed out of fear. Most people live with quiet compromises they rarely admit, not even to themselves. They shelve dreams, avoid risks, and silence desires because fear told them it was safer to stay small. They tell themselves it's responsibility, wisdom, or realism, but deep down, they know it's avoidance. You, without trying, remind them of that life they left behind. You act, speak, and move in ways that show what's possible when fear isn't the boss. That reflection is uncomfortable because it's honest in a world that thrives on excuses. You don't need to highlight their choices. You don't lecture or make comparisons. Simply existing, making your own moves, and living visibly aligned with your intentions is enough. Your presence illuminates the gap between action and potential, and it's impossible to ignore. Every time they watch you succeed, decide boldly, or take risks they wouldn't, they feel the weight of what they've denied themselves. That weight doesn't feel like admiration, it feels like confrontation. What's striking is how personal it becomes. You don't just remind them of opportunities they missed, you force them to reckon with themselves. Regret doesn't have to be loud to sting. It hides in subtle moments. A casual choice you make, an achievement you reach, a boundary you hold. Each instance is a quiet echo of the courage they decided against. That echo unsettles them because it exposes inertia as a choice, not fate. They might mask it with sarcasm, criticism, or indifference, but internally they're aware. Every step you take reminds them of the risks they avoided, the experiences they postponed, and the versions of themselves they never became. That reflection triggers defensiveness, because it's easier to resent you than to face their own hesitation. You carry no judgment, no superiority, and yet the truth of your life acts as a spotlight. People feel it because you show, without words, what life could be when fear doesn't dictate decisions. That realization isn't comfortable, it's powerful, it's destabilizing, and it's impossible to ignore. Number 5, you cannot be easily categorized, and the mind hates what it can't label. Humans are wired to sort, label, and simplify. It makes the world feel safe, predictable, and understandable. When someone can't be neatly boxed into categories, it triggers a quiet, almost primal unease. That's exactly what happens when you enter a space and refuse to fit the expected molds. You don't need to perform complexity or act mysterious. Your very presence, your choices, and the way you move through life defy the simple definitions people rely on to feel secure. And that defiance, whether intentional or not, is destabilizing. People are comforted by labels because labels reduce responsibility. If someone is this or that, they can predict behavior, assign motives, and judge outcomes without ever confronting ambiguity. You, however, resist easy classification. You may be calm but firm, assertive but understated, ambitious but unconcerned with external recognition. You don't fit the template they have memorized for success, influence, or personality. That unpredictability forces their minds to pause, analyze, and most importantly, fail to predict. The discomfort this creates is immediate, visceral, and often masked by irritation or passive aggression. What makes this effect even stronger is that you aren't trying to confuse them. You aren't deliberately being contradictory or cryptic. You are consistent in your own alignment, yet consistent in ways that don't match their expectations. And consistency without predictability is a combination most people don't know how to process. It quietly undermines their sense of control, leaving them restless and uneasy. This inability to label you becomes a mirror of their own rigidity. They see your freedom to exist without a predefined box, and it exposes the subtle chains they've built around themselves to feel safe. That reflection is uncomfortable because it reveals how much energy they spend pretending, conforming, and negotiating to remain readable to others. You don't make people confront themselves directly, but you make it unavoidable. Not knowing what to make of you and failing to reduce you to something manageable creates tension, fascination, and ultimately fear. And that fear isn't about you, it's about the reflection of the unknown they have been avoiding all along. Number 6, you don't perform likability to gain safety. Most people have a hidden rule: be liked and you survive. They smile when expected, soften their tone to avoid conflict, and say what the room wants to hear, just to avoid standing out. It's a survival strategy disguised as charm, friendliness, or social intelligence. You, however, don't operate that way. You don't adjust your words or actions to fit into someone else's comfort zone. You don't apologize for existing or water yourself down to make life easier for others. That alone is enough to unsettle people, because it exposes how much energy they spend performing just to feel safe. You are honest without needing to sugarcoat. You don't hedge your statements to avoid ruffling feathers, and you don't measure reactions before acting. That makes your presence unpredictable in the way that matters most. Not dangerous, just real. Realness in a world built on performances is unsettling. People are so used to reading signals, cues, and social scripts that someone who ignores all of it quietly breaks their sense of order. Your choices and demeanor highlight their compromise, and nothing makes people as nervous as being forced to notice how far they've edited themselves to survive. What makes this especially powerful is that you don't seek validation or approval. You aren't striving for popularity, yet your authenticity commands attention. That combination, confidence without seeking permission, is rare, and it threatens the unspoken social hierarchies built on flattery, conformity, and quiet manipulation. People sense that their usual tactics won't work on you and that helplessness is deeply uncomfortable. You remind them, without ever saying it, that safety doesn't require likability, compromise, or appeasement. You demonstrate that strength and self-trust can exist quietly, calmly, and without performance. That reflection is like a mirror held up to their own calculated existence. They may disguise their discomfort with jokes, criticism, or avoidance, but internally they feel it. You are proof that the rules they live by are optional, and that realization, no matter how subtle, is unnerving. Being yourself without performance isn't arrogance. It's a quiet revolution, one that exposes others to the cost of their own compromises and makes them confront a truth they'd rather ignore. Number 7, you see patterns they are still trapped inside. Most people live life on autopilot, cycling through the same habits, repeating the same mistakes, and clinging to routines that give them a sense of control. They tell themselves they're making choices, but often those choices are just echoes of fear, comfort, or social expectation. You, however, operate differently. You notice connections and patterns in behavior, in relationships, and in situations that others are blind to. You don't just react. You understand the invisible threads that guide outcomes, and that awareness makes people uncomfortable because it exposes their blind spots without a single word being spoken. Your ability to see these patterns doesn't make you superior in the obvious sense, but it does make you a mirror they can't avoid. While they're stuck replaying the same scenarios, repeating emotional loops, or defending decisions that didn't work, you quietly navigate the logic behind life's chaos. The contrast is unnerving. They sense their repetition, their hesitation, and their avoidance reflected back at them, and it triggers subtle fear. It's the fear of recognizing that they've been their own obstacle all along. This insight you carry isn't flashy. You don't broadcast it or use it to dominate conversations. It simply exists in how you move, how you choose, and how you respond. You anticipate outcomes not by controlling others, but by understanding the structures they themselves can't see. That awareness makes them feel exposed because they have spent so much energy avoiding this clarity in themselves. Your presence illuminates the invisible chains they've allowed to shape their lives, and they can't escape that reflection. The power of this is quiet but undeniable. People often try to rationalize, dismiss, or even mock your observations, but deep down, they know the truth in what you see. You force them to confront cycles they would rather ignore, blind spots they've justified for years, and patterns they've normalized. Your vision of life's hidden currents highlights the stagnation in theirs, and that realization, though unspoken, is impossible to ignore. It's not that you threaten them directly, it's that you remind them how trapped they've been, and that reminder, subtle as it may be, is profoundly destabilizing. Number 8, you make their excuses sound hollow without ever confronting them. Excuses are the armor people build around themselves. They justify choices, delay actions, and soften failures with explanations that make them feel safe. Most of the time, those excuses go unchallenged because society rewards politeness, diplomacy, and avoiding discomfort. Then someone like you enters their world, and suddenly, all those carefully crafted justifications start to crumble. Not because you attack them, but because your life quietly contradicts them. You don't need to point out flaws or call out weaknesses. You don't need to lecture or judge. You simply act in alignment with your values, follow through on your intentions, and live in a way that proves action is possible. That simple fact makes their excuses sound empty. Every "I don't have time," "I can't do that," or "it's too risky" is suddenly exposed as a choice rather than a necessity. Your consistency and follow-through shine a light on their hesitation, and it's impossible for them to ignore it. This effect is subtle but deeply unsettling. People might try to laugh it off, redirect attention, or dismiss your achievements, but the truth lingers. They feel the weight of their own rationalizations and know, deep down, that they could have done more if they had chosen to. That unspoken truth is harder to defend against than criticism because it comes from within. You've made their internal logic fail without ever saying a word. The discomfort grows because your life becomes a mirror they can't walk away from. Each choice you make, each step you take, highlights the gap between what they claim and what they do. They are forced to confront a reality they've avoided for years, that excuses only work if no one else proves them unnecessary. Your presence is quiet evidence that fear and procrastination are optional, and that kind of clarity is unnerving. You don't set out to shame anyone, yet your mere alignment with your intentions exposes complacency. That exposure isn't cruel, it's unavoidable. People instinctively feel the hollowness of their justifications, and the realization that their excuses are just stories they've been telling themselves is more destabilizing than any confrontation could ever be. Number 9, You are proof that fear is a choice, not a destiny. Most people carry fear like it's a permanent fixture in their lives, convincing themselves it's inevitable. They say, "I can't do that, it's too risky," or "I'm not built for that," and repeat it so often that it becomes truth in their own minds. Fear, for them, isn't just an emotion. It's a label, an identity, a rule. Then someone like you comes along, quietly moving forward, making choices, taking risks, and acting in ways that seem impossible within the limits they've set for themselves. In that contrast, you become living proof that fear is not a destiny, it's a decision. You don't need to argue or persuade. Your life demonstrates it. Every calculated risk you take, every boundary you maintain, every goal you chase without hesitation, tells a story that challenges their internal narrative. People watch and feel an unease they can't articulate. They realize that the limitations they've accepted were self-imposed. That realization is uncomfortable because it's a truth they have long avoided confronting. Their fear was optional, and their inaction was a choice. This isn't about bravado or recklessness. It's about alignment. You don't eliminate fear completely, but you refuse to let it dictate your life. You move forward despite uncertainty, refusing to wait for permission, reassurance, or consensus. That kind of courage, lived quietly and consistently, destabilizes people who have structured their world around avoiding discomfort. Suddenly, the walls they built to feel safe feel smaller and weaker. The subtlety of your example makes it even more unsettling. You aren't preaching and you aren't forcing anyone to follow. You are simply living in a way that exposes a truth they have long ignored. Fear doesn't have to control the outcome. The choice to move anyway is theirs. But watching you embody it makes them painfully aware of the opportunities they have avoided. Your life becomes a mirror of possibility, reflecting not threat, but potential. That reflection is unnerving because it silently questions everything they've settled for. You are a quiet, living proof that fear is not fate, and that realization shakes the foundation of the lives they've meticulously built around avoiding it. Number 10, you don't chase validation, so manipulation fails. Most people live in a constant search for approval, whether they realize it or not. Every compliment, every nod, every bit of recognition becomes a currency they trade for comfort, security, or influence. That hunger for validation is what makes manipulation effective. Flattery, guilt, subtle pressure, these things work because people want to be seen as right, liked, or accepted. But you don't operate that way. You don't crave recognition, you don't bend to please, and you don't measure your worth by how others respond. That makes manipulation completely powerless against you, and that powerlessness is terrifying for people who rely on it. You live your life in alignment with your own standards, not theirs. Your choices are measured against your values, not the reactions of the crowd. You speak, act, and make decisions without constantly scanning the room for approval. Because of this, attempts to control or influence you through guilt, flattery, or pressure fall flat. People quickly realize that all their usual tools, subtle persuasion, social games, or emotional tactics, simply do not work. And when something that normally works stops working, it breeds insecurity, frustration, and even fear. This isn't about arrogance or defiance. You aren't deliberately trying to resist them. You simply exist outside the system they rely on. That makes you unpredictable in a way that's deeply unsettling. Their instincts tell them, everyone responds in a way I can control, but you defy that expectation. You show them that autonomy is possible, and autonomy exposes just how dependent they've been on controlling the narrative to feel safe. The quiet truth is that your independence forces them to confront their own limitations. They see a person who doesn't need permission, approval, or acceptance to act effectively, and they feel it as a threat to their sense of order. Your resistance to validation acts like a mirror they can't ignore, reflecting the ways they've compromised themselves to gain comfort or influence. And that reflection, unspoken but undeniable, is far more destabilizing than any argument, insult, or confrontation could ever be. You prove, without words, that true control starts with refusing to let others hold it over you. Number 11. You reflect emotional self-sufficiency in a dependent culture. Most people are built to rely on others, not just for survival, but for validation, comfort, and even a sense of identity. Relationships, friendships, and workplaces are full of unspoken agreements where emotional dependence is the glue that holds social structures together. People lean on each other for reassurance, approval, and safety, often without realizing how much of their emotional stability comes from someone else's energy. Then you show up, quietly embodying self-sufficiency. You carry your own weight, manage your own emotions, and don't rely on anyone else to feel complete. That reflection is uncomfortable for those who have built their lives around dependence. You don't perform kindness or compromise for attention. You don't seek to manipulate or be manipulated to maintain a sense of belonging. You simply manage your own inner world and act from that place of clarity. That independence highlights the cracks in the structures others rely on. They see how much of their confidence, happiness, or control depends on outside validation, and that realization unsettles them. Your calm, balanced presence forces them to recognize the ways they have handed away their emotional power over the years. It's subtle but profound. They might joke, dismiss, or even criticize, but deep down they feel the tension. Your self-reliance acts as a mirror, exposing dependency as limitation. It's not that you are superior or intentionally pointing it out. It's simply that you live differently. That difference creates a quiet discomfort they can't escape because it touches something fundamental, the ways they've structured their lives to feel safe and supported, often at the cost of self-trust. Your presence reminds them that emotional self-sufficiency is not only possible but freeing. They may resist or rationalize, but the impact lingers. You don't need anyone to prop you up, and that freedom is powerful because it reveals the invisible chains they have quietly accepted. In a culture built on dependence, someone who truly stands on their own becomes a living reflection of choice, autonomy, and inner strength. And that reflection is impossible to ignore. Number 12. You don't need to be understood to move forward. Most people live their lives waiting for permission disguised as understanding. They pause, over-explain, and shape every action to ensure someone else gets it before they proceed. Their confidence is often conditional, tied to the approval, agreement, or comprehension of others. You, however, operate differently. You move forward regardless of whether anyone else fully understands your decisions, your path, or even your perspective. That alone makes people uneasy, because it exposes how much they rely on external validation to feel safe in motion. You don't hesitate for permission, and you don't justify your choices to soothe someone else's discomfort. You understand that clarity is internal, not social. Your forward motion highlights the ways others overcomplicate life with explanations, reassurances, and compromises, just to make their actions palatable to those around them. The fact that you can act decisively without needing consensus or comprehension challenges the invisible rules they've built around interaction and progress. This creates a subtle but intense tension. People notice, often without articulating it, that your decisions are self-contained. They can't influence your pace or direction with doubt, criticism, or hesitation. That lack of control feels uncomfortable because most people's influence over others is built on ensuring understanding first and compliance second. When those levers fail, frustration, anxiety, or defensiveness emerges. What makes your approach even more powerful is its quiet confidence. You aren't confrontational or boastful. You don't insist that others follow or agree. You simply move in alignment with your purpose, letting your actions speak louder than explanation. That clarity in motion becomes a mirror, reflecting how much time and energy others waste waiting for approval, reassurance, or comprehension. By refusing to anchor your progress to someone else's understanding, you reveal the invisible chains they've been living with. Your independence is not aggressive. It's simply unstoppable, undeniable, and profoundly unsettling for anyone conditioned to measure their worth and security by the reactions of others. You are proof that action doesn't require permission, and that truth resonates quietly but powerfully. Number 13, you force them to confront their own unrealized capacity. Most people live inside invisible limits they've set for themselves. They convince themselves they've done all they can, that the circumstances they're in are fixed, or that ambition has an expiration date. They rationalize, postpone, and settle for comfort, disguised as realism. Then you appear, quietly and without fanfare, doing what they said couldn't be done, achieving what they said was out of reach, or thinking in ways they never dared. Your actions act like a spotlight, revealing the space between who they are and who they could have been. That contrast is disorienting, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore. You don't need to push, lecture, or challenge them. You don't need to point out their limitations. Your presence alone shows that fear, hesitation, and conformity aren't inevitable. When people observe you acting on your potential, it forces a quiet reckoning. They start to feel the weight of their own untapped abilities, the ideas they never pursued, the risks they avoided, and the dreams they postponed. It's not a judgment coming from you. It's the truth reflected in your choices, and that truth makes them restless. What's striking is how subtle this effect is. You aren't flaunting success or exaggerating achievement. You simply align your actions with your capability, and that alignment exposes what others have left dormant. Every boundary you maintain, every step you take toward your goals, every refusal to settle, highlights the contrast between your life and theirs. And because they've long avoided confronting their own unrealized capacity, the discomfort is immediate and visceral. This reflection is destabilizing because it reveals that limitation is a choice, not a destiny. They are forced to face the fact that inaction, fear, and compromise are not inevitable. They are self-imposed. Your consistency, clarity, and follow-through silently demonstrate what is possible, and in doing so, it makes them question every excuse, hesitation, and compromise they've justified for themselves. By existing fully in your potential, you do more than succeed. You act as a living mirror of what could have been, and that reflection is impossible to ignore, profoundly unsettling, and deeply transformative, whether they admit it or not. Number 14, you are calm where they are constantly negotiating with fear. Most people live in a constant state of negotiation with fear, whether they admit it or not. Every decision, every word, every interaction is filtered through caution, insecurity, or the invisible rules they've accepted to stay safe. They calculate outcomes, hedge bets, and rehearse responses endlessly, trying to control situations they can't fully manage. Then you arrive, and nothing about you follows that pattern. You are calm, you move with steady confidence, make decisions without overthinking, and respond without hesitation. That calm is quiet but powerful, and it unsettles people in ways they can't easily explain. Your calm doesn't come from ignorance of risk or a lack of awareness. It comes from clarity. You know your boundaries, you understand your intentions, and you trust your own judgment. Because of this, you act decisively without the internal chaos most people carry with them like invisible chains. Observing you, people feel the contrast immediately. Their nervous energy, their calculated hesitations, and their constant mental negotiations are exposed in stark relief. It's a subtle confrontation, but it hits harder than any words could. What makes this effect so powerful is that you aren't trying to intimidate or impress. You are simply aligned with yourself. You don't need approval, reassurance, or validation to move forward. And that alignment creates a space that others cannot easily occupy. Their constant negotiation with fear feels heavy, exhausting, and in comparison chaotic, while your composure is effortless. This calm functions like a mirror, reflecting what they are missing in their own lives. They recognize, often subconsciously, that fear doesn't have to dictate behavior, that hesitation is optional, and that confidence can exist quietly and steadily. That recognition is destabilizing because it forces them to confront the anxiety, overthinking, and compromises they've normalized. You aren't loud, aggressive, or flashy. You are simply steady. And that steadiness, in a world constantly buzzing with fear and negotiation, is profoundly unsettling. Your calm exposes the tension they've built around insecurity and highlights, without a word, a level of mastery and peace they have yet to achieve. Everything we've explored here points to a single, undeniable truth. Your presence, your alignment, and your quiet strength act as mirrors in a world built on compromise, fear, and performance. You don't need to dominate, explain, or prove anything. By simply living in integrity, moving with clarity, and trusting yourself, you reveal the gaps others have long ignored in their own lives. Every choice you make, every boundary you hold, every step you take toward your potential exposes what is possible, quietly dismantling excuses, challenging dependency, and reflecting truths people would rather avoid. You are not a threat because of what you do. You are a revelation because of who you are. The power of this isn't loud or aggressive, it's subtle, profound, and transformative. People may label it as intimidating, distant, or different, but what they are really feeling is a reflection of their own unclaimed potential, unrealized capacity, and the fears they've chosen to live by. You are proof that fear, hesitation, and compromise are optional, and that authenticity, calm, and self-sufficiency are attainable. That truth, quietly lived, commands attention, inspires change, and unsettles those who measure life by anything other than alignment with self. This is not about being better than anyone else. It's about being fully yourself, refusing to bend for approval, and showing, without words, that life can be lived with clarity, courage, and consistency. Every time you embody that truth, you remind the world what is possible when someone stops negotiating with fear and starts trusting themselves. If this resonated with you, make sure to show your support. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment your thoughts, and share it with someone who needs to see this. Living in alignment is powerful, but sharing it amplifies the truth. Let's continue to grow, reflect, and challenge the limits that hold us all back. Stay blessed always.